Our speaker today is Professor Tonia Eckfeld, and this is one of her books. Hey, look at that. It's the same as what's on the screen.
Hey, how about
Excellent.
that was a pretty good accident.
Amazing grace. Anyway, so that's the real thing. I'm holding this. I'm trying to do the right thing by you, you know. Tonia grew up in Melbourne in the shadow and the light of the Dunera refugee experience of her family and their friends. We've never met. I mean, we've met, but we don't have a long common history together, notwithstanding our joint backgrounds.
Dad, did you say that your father was... You just said it.
I sort of said it, yeah, but
I didn't listen.
you didn't listen. That's my experience at home too. Despite a lifetime of knowledge gained about the Dunera experience as a daughter and niece of two Dunera boys, Reinhold and Waldemar Eckfeld, many questions remained. And that's my experience too. So just the other day, Professor Leon Mann sent me some questions. And you know, you feel like a nit because you don't know all the answers, you know. But reading all your material, the material that Seumas has collected over all the years, helps. Tonia found the truth of events in a trove of primary sources which are traced in her book, there above. Also, inside the Dunera story, the Monash University publishing of 2024, should have been produced by the Lamb Jewish Library. Never mind. Tonia is a Professor of Art History and Principal Fellow at the University of Melbourne. We're delighted to have you here, Tonia. It's
Thanks.
Great. And it's great that you're speaking to us. And welcome everybody who's joined us today. Seumas, Dr. Seumas Spark, is an Adjunct Research Fellow in History at Monash University, that's a local little place, and a leading expert, opposite my dental surgery actually, and a leading expert on the history of the Dunera-boys. He's the co-author of the two-volume Dunera Lives, A Visual History and Dunera Lives Profiles. They co-created with Kate Garrett of the website Stories from the Dunera and the Queen Mary, and the past president of the Dunera Association, and he has presented here several times before. He's a crowd favourite, that's why we keep having him back. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our two speakers. Yeah. Now, there's one other person here in the audience that none of you know, because he's the newly appointed rabbi of the Mizrahi community, Rabbi Daniel Epstein, who's hiding in the back there. He's very shy. And he's got mishpocha who were involved with the Dunera, so that's why he's here too, even though he's a POM. It's confusing. Why would anybody go back there? Anyway, over to you guys. Seumas, thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny, for the warm welcome, as always. Talk of a pond makes me want to redirect the evening to the Ashes and a sort of close dissection of the summer of cricket, but maybe that's for afterwards.
It's just a brief moment.
I just want to ask a question, Seumas, if that's okay first, because Danny, you talked about, well, we've met slightly before, but we haven't really met and shaken hands before.
I try to keep things, you know, so that Roland doesn't know about this, but anyway, my wife. Yeah.
That's okay. Yeah, but you know, you said that your father was a Dunera boy, so I really feel like any time we meet anyone with a Dunera connection, it's like having another cousin. You know, there's this immediate connection. And what I wanted to ask just before Seumas and I start is, how many people here have a Dunera or Queen Mary connection? Yeah, okay. And how many people have already read the book? Okay, that helps. So we pretty much know what we're talking about, and we've all got our own Dunera stories. So that's good to know.
So just to add to Danny's welcome, offer my own welcome. It's always lovely to be back at the Land Library. Merav is a wonderful director and has put on lots of lovely events. I was driving up here today and I thought, well, isn't it nice to be going back to the Land Library, sort of amid the crazy world, and have a night of good conversation and some respite from distressing world events. I also, if I may add this, when I was driving up today, I was sort of worried, filled up, and it cost $200, and I was worried about the world events and the way things are. And I actually, believe it or not, someone who's become something of an inspiration to me in recent times was thinking of Edith Ungar, who happens to be there. And Edith, the many times I've spoken with her recently, I think she's astonishing because she can cope with anything. And so I thought, well, if Edith can do it, I can do it, we can do it. So welcome to you, Edith, as well. Edith is about to turn 97, and she's absolutely remarkable. So I'm going to ask Tonia some questions, then we'll have time for audience questions. Jack's asked me that if you do have a question afterwards, please wait until the microphone comes along so that the camera picks up the sound. And welcome, Tonia. It's nice to be here.
Thanks, Seumas. Nice to be here with you too.
So, Tonia, your father, Reinhold, and your uncle, Waldemar, were deported to Australia on the Dunera. Can you tell us something of their early lives and how they came to be on that ship?
I can tell you that. And as well, since I have to confess that for those of you who've read the book already, since the book came out, I've found out more things. The Dunera story, I think you've said it, Seumas, it's a story that just goes on giving, and there's more and more interesting things to discover. So my father on the left, Reinhold, aged 13, and his brother Waldemar in 1935 in the Botanic Gardens in Vienna. And this was when they had their happy life before there was any trouble. They had no problems, no worries, and they were both students. My father at grammar school, and Waldemar had just finished school and had gained entry into the University of Vienna to study medicine. It was quite a straightforward life. The Echfield family in Vienna. Wilhelm was Jewish. He was from a rabbinical family. His father was a rabbi and head of a rabbinical court. And he himself was a journalist. His early career, interestingly, was he worked with Theodor Herzl, who wrote Judenstaat, for his weekly newspaper, Die Welt, which was a Zionist newspaper. And so in Wilhelm's early career, he was a Zionist. I think at a time when Zionism was a dream, an idea. And he wrote Jewish stories and Zionist stories for Die Welt. Later in his career, he was an editorial journalist with a literary focus for now a Freie Presse, the main daily newspaper in Vienna, which was Jewish owned but not Jewish orientated in its publication. Their mother, Eugenie, was a public servant, and she later worked for the Vaterländische Front, the ruling political party in Vienna, which was led by Dr. Schuschnigg. And there, Waldemar, Judith, and Reinhold in 1934. This drawing of Wilhelm from 1931 was drawn by Judith, and it's the only image at all that we have of Wilhelm. So one of my dreams is that somehow I might find a photograph of him in the future. And typically his reading, Eugenie said, he was always reading, he was always writing, and to her, worse still, because she was a very practical person, he was always thinking. So that was their father, who'd studied philosophy at the University of Berlin. I didn't have this drawing when I wrote the book. This drawing only turned up last year, and it's also from 1934. And it shows the kind of life the nice middle-class simple life and the simple enjoyments of going to the park. And drawn by Reinhold, aged 12. You can see a gentleman reading the newspaper on the left with his dachshund. Beside him, an older lady chatting to a young woman with a baby in a pram, and the older lady's feeding the pigeons, feeding them crumbs. And then on the right side, two boys. And in effect, Reinhold has drawn himself and his best friend, and they're playing marbles. So Reinhold from his school photo on the left, and his best friend Alfred, who'd been his best friend right through primary school and through high school. And those of you who've read the book will know what happened to their friendship later on. So, yeah. In those days, Vienna was a very multicultural society, very open and very equal. And recently I've found, which Dad had kept carefully, a yearbook from his school, Bundesgymnasium 19, BG 19, which was in Döbling where they lived. And that yearbook from the school, 1934-1935, had a lot of interesting statistics. So there were statistics about the background of the boys in the school. Certainly in Reinhold's class, they all had German as their mother tongue. They all lived with their parents in the local area. And there were also numbers of, by religion of the boys. 13 in his class were Roman Catholic, 7 were Jewish, and 4 were Protestant. And at this time it made no difference. Everyone was friends with everyone, and I've managed to mark just 6. I'm not sure who the 7th was, but who the Jewish boys were. Reinhold at the back, next to him Otto Orenstein, who made it eventually to Hawaii, and the next boy on that middle row also made it to the US, and I'm not sure about the fate of the other boys ultimately. So their life was fine and very nice until 1938, and most of us here, or our families, will have been affected. Certainly, if you are in Austria, by the annexation or the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria by Hitler on 13th of March 1938. And when Hitler annexed Austria, everything changed, and the Nuremberg race laws came down hard in Vienna, and Vienna was a model city for anti-Semitism. At that time, Wilhelm was arrested, but fortunately released after 24 hours. The Jewish-owned Now Freie Presse newspaper was taken over, in other words, Aryanised, and Wilhelm lost his job. The VF party, for which Eugenie worked, was thrown out of government, and its leader, Dr. Schuschnigg, was arrested. So Eugenie also became unemployed. The family then relied solely on the income of Judith, who was a legal secretary, and her job was also with a non-Aryan solicitor firm, and she had income while that job lasted. So the complete existence of the family was turned on its head and went from very nice middle-class existence focused on family and an extended family and schooling and work, completely was blown apart. For the two boys, Reinhold and Waldemar, these documents mark the turning point for them. At the top left, a rubber stamp on Reinhold's school report saying this pupil is terminated according to the rules, and dated the 4th of October 1938. that was a cruel blow for a young boy who with a very academic boy with great aspirations for his future. The other documents are all from the final record of Waldemar's enrolment in his third year at the University of Vienna in the medical faculty. You can see that on the left hand, Eckfeld Waldemar Deutsch, so his nationality is now not Austrian but German because Austria has been annexed. And further down, his religion is actually listed as Roman Catholic because he changed his religion from Jewish to Roman Catholic in 1935, I think it was. Nevertheless, his enrolment form was marked at the top, enrolment under the preamble of withdrawal, and in red, M1. So that was to indicate that he was to be expelled under the race laws, and M1 marked him as Mischling grade 1 or mixed race grade 1 because he had a Jewish father. Something that I've recently discovered looking more carefully at his enrolment records was who he was taught by. And I know the family said that he was a bit stressed about his medical studies, but what I could see is that he'd gone through all his medical studies in the first couple of years seamlessly, and there was a hiccup sort of around the end of his second year and certainly in his third year. And I noticed that there were two professors who were problematic, and there was more to his situation than just being stressed by his studies. One was that he had, for anatomy preparation of a corpse, a professor called Gustav Sauser. And I don't know if any of you have heard of Gustav Sauser, but he plotted the women's 28-day cycle, and he did that by having access to executed people. So after the Anschluss, he had access to people who he could, put in an order, because it was a 28-day cycle, so he could have someone from executed on every day of the 28 days. And worse still, Edward Pernkopf, Professor Pernkopf, he had in his final semester, and Pernkopf became known as Hitler's anatomist. So I can't imagine what it would have been like to spend 6 hours a week in anatomy with Edward Pernkopf. Pernkopf came to the University of Vienna, and his job, he was the rector, he was head of the medical faculty and rector, and it was his job to Nazify the University of Vienna. So he went, on his arrival, he immediately sacked 70% of the medical faculty staff, and then the next step was to clear out all the Jewish students. So as Hitler's anatomist, he used 1,377 or more, bodies of people who he could more or less have. He had unlimited supply on order. And with that he made a very famous illustrated atlas of anatomy, which has since become quite problematic and not discredited for its work but for its ethics. And I can only imagine what Waldemar must have had to listen to in those anatomy lessons. Anyway, a new discovery. Yes, so on top of these tremendous worries, there were the events of Kristallnacht. Waldemar, like so many others, was pulled off the street and made to clean toilets using his own clothing. And Reinhold was arrested and taken away, beaten, interrogated and detained, along with thousands of others. Altogether, about 30,000 people across the Reich were arrested on Kristallnacht. And Reinhold narrowly missed being sent to Dachau because he was 17 years old. If he'd been 18, he would have been sent away. So it was a very lucky escape, but that really gave the family more impetus to you know, there was no doubt about it that they then had to leave and find another country to go to, which was not easy. And that process started a long period of many labels over many years. So they were labelled in their homeland, but that the labelling then continued. In Ireland, when they made it to the UK after a quite long and difficult process, and got permission to work there, Eugenie and Judith as domestic servants, and the two boys as agricultural workers, and their father unfortunately couldn't get a visa and he was left behind. And they were quite happy in the UK, and they were accepted there as friendly refugees. They were considered Jewish. Waldemar worked for a Protestant family, so he went to the Protestant church. He was considered a Protestant Jew, and Reinhold worked for the baker, the delivery man, and he was Catholic, so he went with Mr. Harley and his family to the Roman Catholic Church, and was a Catholic Jew in Ireland. That was sort of the Irish sign of acceptance. They were redefined as male enemy aliens, and later on their cards were marked with Intern Circular 21640, which was the circular of the 21st of June 1940, which was the order for arrests, turning friendly aliens into enemy internees. I guess that's the background, Seumas.
Thank you, Tonia. So I hesitate to use the word interesting because it's very sad and difficult, but one of the ways the Eckfeld story is significant in terms of Dunera history is that the experiences of Waldemar especially start to diverge from about the time of the ship and that terrible voyage. So can you tell us of the brothers' experiences on the voyage and the sadness and difficulties that began to envelop Waldemar?
Yeah, I can. It's a difficult story, and it's one that not many people talk about. I'm sure that there are many people who had very dark, and unhappy, like really deeply troubling experiences, and it's not been discussed. So really, I wanted to bring that part to light, to bring it into the fresh air, and also so we can all understand the circumstances of those people who really did it hard. And by understanding, giving them back their dignity. That was important to me, because it was a tough process. Everyone will have their own story, Dunera story of how the arrest happened, of their Dunera people. In the case of Reinhold and Waldemar, they were taken from Londonderry. They were arrested they had to live with their employers, which they were happy to do, but they were arrested at their employers' homes where they were residing, and taken to Belfast by the police and put in jail, and then taken by boat to Liverpool and put in an open field in a tent in Highton, Liverpool. And the paperwork that went with that, this is part of Waldemar's paperwork, and it has this sticker on it. It's got Circular 21640, and then it also has a sticker added to it. Sailed for Australia in SS Dunera on 10th of July 1940. So that's the first piece of paperwork that goes with that. When the boys were arrested, they thought that they might be going to Canada, and Reinhold saved this article from the Derry Journal, so in Londonderry, on the 21st of June 1940, where it said the interned aliens in Great Britain are being evacuated to Canada. So it sort of gave them false hope, which was something which was dashed. So another sort of disappointment.
We should also say, I mean, interned aliens were sent to Canada.
They were sent to Canada.
Just not your brother.
Not them. So yeah, there were five ships that went in all deporting the internees. The first one was the Duchess of York, went to Canada. The second was the Arandora Star, in which about 800 people drowned because it was torpedoed. The third was the Ettrick. The fourth was the Sobieski. I hope I've said that correctly. Sobieski, maybe. And the fifth one was the Dunera. So the first four were making their way to Canada, and the fifth one was the Dunera, which was the last that finished it because it was so awful. And that didn't go to Canada. And you get to Canada in about a week, maybe 8 days, but it took about 57, 58 days for the Dunera to get to Australia. And I think we saw all the hands up earlier, so we all know how that was. Waldemar, before the journey, drawn by Reinhold, and what we see here is a medical student. He's handsome, he's intelligent, he's shy, he's a little bit broody. Yeah, but he's sensitive and lovely. And we'll see a bit of change in him over the course of things on the Dunera. It was a 2-month voyage, under the most appalling conditions. Reinhold had to sleep on the floor for the 2 months with people. He was under a table, people stood on him, people vomited on him, he himself was seasick. You know, there must have been probably buckets of swill and whatever tipping over. It was just, the food was disgusting, the sanitation was disgusting, they were trapped and there were not proper safety, anything that they was safe in event of an emergency. And they go through the tropics, short of water and all sorts of other things, but Reinhold's recording where they're going, Freetown, Takoradi, they cross the equator, Cape Town. He draws a little image. And then on the 13th of August, down on the second page, W Hospital. So on the 13th of August, after a month at sea, Waldemar was admitted to the ship's hospital, and he had a breakdown on the ship. And he wasn't the only one. If you read all the Dunera records and the Dunera statement, like everybody must. It would. If you didn't feel terrible, you wouldn't be normal, I'd say. And there were many others who were also, in a very terrible state of mind. Around that time, there were 3 people who died on the journey. One man who committed suicide was around that time. He jumped overboard to commit suicide on the 20th of August. So that's how bad people felt. Anyway, he lasted a month, but after a month he needed to go to the hospital. And the hospital had 100 beds in it. Lieutenant Brooks was the doctor in charge, and the internee doctors, including Janie, the Dunsiger brothers, I think, they also worked in the hospital on board the Dunera, as did medical students like Waldemar to help out. Now, with 100 beds, what we read is that the 100 beds were always full. There must have been a lot of people in very poor way, not just Waldemar, but many, many people who went through a great deal of trouble on board the ship. By the time it eventually got to Perth, the Australian military came on board, and there hadn't been adequate records of who was on board, who they were, anything else. It had been done so poorly in such a rush. And cards like this, Certificate of Registration Internee, for the Commonwealth of Australia were issued, And this is Reinhold's one. We don't have Waldemar's one. Don't know what happened to it. It's not in the National Archives. Don't know. And they were fingerprinted. So this sort of didn't bode well if you were worried. It might make you wonder more, what's my fate going to be? What's going to happen? So that was Fremantle. And then in Melbourne, something very bad happens. And on Tuesday, the 3rd of September, in Melbourne Port, the ship has docked, and Waldemar, who can only be feeling desperate to have done this, got hold of a regimental sergeant's uniform from one of the British Guards. He puts it on, he jumps out a porthole, and he doesn't even make it to the dock, to the pier. He is grabbed by a number of Pioneer Corps guards and just dragged back to the ship and put in a cell where he is relentlessly beaten. And there are accounts of that. One of the accounts is by Simon's grandfather, George, and Margaret's father, Kate, yeah, and others who describe what happened. Yes, we could hear the terrible sound of whiplash accompanied by the agonising screams of a tortured human being. He was beaten by 4 sergeants with batons and left lying in his own blood. Nothing could be done about it. And the Australians were on board, and the official report by Captain Hayway, who was in charge of the Australians and the documenting part, said in his first letter reporting, and it was highlighted as being of great significance, he writes, "It was fortunate that the man did not succumb to his injuries. An inquiry was held, but I have no knowledge that any disciplinary action was taken." So on the day after the beating, which nearly killed Waldemar, Reinhold was allowed to see him, to visit him in the ship's hospital. He'd been sort of sewn back together and had some medical attention. But Reinhold said he was unrecognisable, and he could only recognise Waldemar by his hair. So if you think about the good-looking boy before and what he looked like later, his teeth were knocked out and broken, his nose was broken, his eyes were black and his face swollen. He was beaten and his right leg was badly injured. So there's nothing good to say about that, and it set him off on not a good trajectory in landing in Australia, because where the others went to internment in camps, so Reinhold went to Hay and then to Tura, Waldemar spent about nearly 19 months very sick with physical injuries and depression and PTSD in various hospitals in Sydney, which don't look very nice places to be. So he's sort of isolated compared to the others who had their fellowship. He was away from Reinhold and kept away from everybody else. And given that the assault happened in 1940, suddenly in May 1941, when I looked through the records, loads and loads and loads of articles were there about Waldemar's attempted escape, as if he was a dangerous person, and also the beating and the maltreatment, and that the guards said, "Oh no, we're not guilty of anything. Nothing to see here. We didn't do anything." So all of this is going on, and Waldemar's kept separate, and no one from the Dunera, none of the internees were able to give any testimony when it went to court-martial proceedings. So there's nothing good to say about Waldemar's suffering, and I can't say that any court-martial results made it okay, because it didn't, but it was an outcome, and that's a link that sort of hasn't been made until now, really. So I am kind of glad to say it, to give us a little bit more information, because people often wonder about the court-martials on the Dunera. So I don't know if that's interesting, but I think it's interesting. So the three who were court-martialed, one was Bowles for theft. He tried to take a ring from an internee's finger and nearly took the gentleman's finger off. And in relation to the other two, Helliwell, who was the worst in terms of the assault, and said, "I'm not guilty of anything," was only guilty of disobeying an order because he didn't give blankets or water to Waldemar after the assault when he was left in the cell overnight. And Major William Patrick Scott received a court-martial for failing to make a proper inquiry into the violence against Waldemar. So two of the three court-martials related directly to the assault of Waldemar, but in very, very watered-down conditions. I just keep racing ahead, Seumas. I'm so sorry. That's about the voyage. I think they've got off the ship now.
I might, I think, pick up on a point that has been made. I think, and many people here will be familiar with this, but the Dunera is so often told as a story of triumph, and of course there are elements of that is true. But what generally isn't told is about, as Tonia mentioned, the suffering of many men, the fact that it was enormously difficult for many men, and the vast sort of variety of experiences and perspectives in that regard. So someone like Bern Brent, who was the last living Dunera, we thought the last living Dunera man in Australia, but now I think probably the last living Dunera person anywhere. He died a couple of years ago, aged 100. He wouldn't hear anything. He said, "Oh, Dunera was terrible, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me because it brought me to Australia." And he wouldn't hear any. He was the most probably extreme proponent of that view that I've ever heard. And then conversely, and this is what we don't talk about enough, is we know that quite a lot of Dunera men committed suicide after the war. Sort of suffering and difficulties that have begun in the war. A number of Dunera men killed themselves from survivor guilt. They'd lost all their families in the Holocaust, and the Dunera, for all its ills, had actually made them safe in hay, and they couldn't live with that. And so this is an aspect of the story, and I think why Tonia's book is very important, that it helps sort of give us a fuller perspective and sort of a stronger and more rounded perspective. I think, I mean, you were going to speak about this, Tonia, but Waldemar eventually committed suicide. If you're comfortable, can you tell us about that and how those struggles affected your father? Did he speak of those matters?
Well, of course, it was extremely painful and distressing for the whole family when that happened, and it wasn't a secret, but it was a painful thing. After the war, their mother and sister were able to immigrate to Australia, and the family was a close unit. Reinhold had married, he had kids, he had a career, and they were a really loving, supportive family. But it just wasn't enough. Something had happened, and best way sometimes is a little bit graphically. These two drawings are from Tatura camp when Reinhold and Waldemar were reunited, and they're two drawings by Reinhold of Waldemar. And so they're together again, and it's sort of, it's hopeful. But you can see in this portrait, again, thinking back to the earlier portrait of Waldemar in 1940, this is only, 3 years later, and there's something, I feel, Dad always thought this was an excellent likeness, and everyone did, and it is, but there's something in his eyes that there's a spark that's gone out, He's suffering. Both got their freedom, Reinhold to the army and Waldemar to war work, but he could never get his career back. Reinhold, because he went through the army, had a pathway, but Waldemar had no pathway back to medicine, and his health was very compromised. He tried to join the army to be with the other former internees in the 8th Employment Company, but his health and physical condition was very poor after what had happened on the Dunera. In Ireland, he'd applied to go into the British Pioneer Corps, and he was declared medically good, medically fit for that, but he was no longer fit for the army, so there was no pathway for him. And it's just interesting, I think, to sort of compare. It's just 8 years between the photo on the left and the photo on the right, and looks okay, but what's happened in those 8 years, was life-changing. So in answer to Seumas's question, in 1959, Waldemar committed suicide. It was very unexpected by the family, but clearly quite planned, quite thought through by him that he intended to do that. And everyone always said he really missed that he had no career, he had no medical career or pathway. People who wound up in exile, they lost their home, their country, their culture, their language, their relatives, their friends, their careers, all their worldly possessions. They lost sort of everything. It was a difficult situation. So he'd been sort of betrayed twice, once by Hitler and again by the British. He'd been mistreated on the Dunera, and he had mental health issues and ongoing PTSD and depression. So it was understandable, but the family was naturally devastated. But there's so many people, as you said, Seumas suffered terrible tragedies. Waldemar writes to his friend Dr. Recknitz about when he's free, and he's taking a walk and talking with other former internee friends. And when I sort of looked at what their situations were, they had, maybe one had his wife and parents had been left behind in Vienna and had been sent to concentration camps. People had left their significant others and couldn't save them. They could maybe send Red Cross parcels or something like that, but there's tremendous uncertainty, and there were also such dreadful outcomes, as time went on for those people too. So it just was enormous suffering of these people who felt exiled.
Ask a slightly intrusive question, if I can. I know
I
you're
don't
the
know if
youngest.
you can. Don't know if you can, but anyway.
You're the youngest, and your siblings are here. And do either of you remember? Were you born before? We
all were alive.
Yeah.
Some we won't say people's age, but some were older. The others were older than me. Yeah, I was the little one.
And do you remember?
Yeah, we do, and I'm surprised that Stephen was in a pram, and he says he remembers the scream.
Oh no, now we'll get into the suicide with the information about the suicide.
Picked me up from school and we walked up to Grandma's house to make the announcement. So
Yeah.
I remember the primordial scream.
Yeah, and we were told by Mum to wait in the back garden by the back door, and I was to look after the younger ones.
Yeah.
and Mum went in, and I heard her talking to Grandma, and then all of a sudden this horrific scream, "Oh, my baby, my baby," she said over and over again.
Yeah.
It was, something that is permanently embedded in our memory, because I can remember talking to Waldemar inside the house, and he taught me how to iron a hanky one day because he was ironing. So yes, it's scarred us very much.
Thank you, Erica. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude
No.
about his death. I was just interested in if you
Yeah, it's nice to
remembered.
ask, and I've talked to other cousins, who were older, and had the chance to know him and share some stories. And he was very well liked and very well embraced into my mother's family, and everyone found he was highly intelligent and very genteel, very refined, and thoughtful person. So he was well liked. Yeah.
I think I'd like to, obviously this is a book about brothers, and one of the lovely things about this book is your father, Reinhold, comes across as a sort of very gentle, educated, lovely, good person. Can you tell us about his post-war life in Australia and his career?
Yeah, sure. His career was as an architect, and he would always say that his career began in the internment camps. When he got to Hay, he had the chance to draw, he had the chance to write, and subsequently to study. And I'll just mention one thing which he did sort of straight away, was to write down his memories of the last months in Vienna. He wrote them in these two lovely 1940s exercise books, and he wrote them. He filled these up sitting at a desk in his hut, and he wanted to clear his mind. So that was the first part. And what he wrote was published in 2002 in Vienna, in the book on the left, which was really highly acclaimed when it was released because of the sort of detail and veracity of the account of his last months in Vienna, really particularly from Kristallnacht on, and the whole process of trying to leave. And the book that same book has just come out again in 2024. So I just think that's interesting. I'll just throw that in before we get to his career, and that comprises a lot of the first part of No One Knows Their Destiny as well. What I should have said is that he started architectural studies and engineering studies too in the internment camps. His education had been interrupted, and he'd had to do other work, in between in Vienna and then in Ireland. In the camp were so many talented people, and Reinhold, he was one of the younger ones. He was born in 1921 and quite adaptable, but there were a lot of older, experienced and highly qualified men, and some of those we've heard about here, thank you Mirav, at the Lamb Library talks. One of them was Herbert Ostersetzer, and Herbert Ostersetzer, who later called himself Herbert Ost in Britain, was a Viennese architect, and he had gone to the same school as Reinhold, though much earlier. He was born in 1894, so he was a whole generation older. And he was a modernist architect, and he was very well known in Austria and became very well known in Britain as well for his modernist designs. And Reinhold studied for 20 hours of formal lectures a week in Tatura, and he sort of became the assistant, well not sort of, he became the assistant to Ostersetzer, who became the camp architect. I'm not sure how it is being a camp architect in something like Tatura Camp 2, but anyway, he had the office of camp architect, and Reinhold was his assistant. So Ostersetzer was a modernist architect. He was also very interested in interior design, in furniture, furnishings and fittings. So the complete architectural package. And so look, Reinhold absorbed his ideas like a sponge, and also did a lot of drawing in the camps, including more architectural drawing and technical drawings, as much as you can in an environment like that. How did his career go? Well, the army was his pathway in a sense. Once he could get out of the camps, and he could have got out earlier, but he waited until both he and Waldemar could both get out. And when Waldemar could get out too, then Reinhold straight away enlisted, and so that they were both free at the same time. And Reinhold immediately started at RMIT, studying first draftsmanship and then architecture. I think, Janie, you asked me once, why didn't my father go to the University of Melbourne? And that would be because he didn't have the benefit of his matriculation. He was talented. He was talented, and that would have been his chosen career. Would have been to be a portrait artist and art teacher.
Did he have some training in
No formal other than whatever they did at school. No formal training, and
in the case of Dunera, he actually met some really good artists.
yeah, he might have had a bit more of a. We're just talking middle class in my family. Leonard might have had a bit of more privileged access to that sort of thing. And I think you might have missed just the beginning where where the whole family became unemployed due to the race laws. So the financial means weren't there to do some of those extracurriculars. Maybe different. We can talk about that later. But I don't know. I don't think he had any special training under particular artists or anything like that in Vienna. He was just quite talented, natural talent. Yes, because he'd been in the army. So he went to night school at RMIT, and then because he'd been in the army, was it 1943 or 1944? The Commonwealth retraining scheme was brought in where people who'd served a certain amount of time in the armed services could get their enrolment fees paid for, and that helped to support him to continue his studies, which took him a long time, up until 1959. It was 13 years of hard slog. Thanks to Erica, he had to have a semester off at one point, or a year off in the middle. She was a baby. And this is one of his designs from his studies. When he left the army in 46, he tried for various jobs, and some of them in retrospect, he was quite glad he had been rejected as a foreigner but I'm in uniform. Why would we give a job to you when we've got plenty of our own boys in uniform to give jobs to? So he missed out on a few jobs that was probably quite lucky, and he got a job in the architectural firm of Best Overend, quite well-known Melbourne architect, and worked on a lot of big projects and a lot of town planning projects. So that's how his career began.
I have two more questions for you, if I may, and
Yeah.
I'm going to combine two slightly.
Yeah.
I'm interested, what was your motivation for writing this book and telling your father's and your uncle's Dunera stories? And as a sort of addendum to that question, in writing of Waldemar's life, were you conscious of telling his story as a corrective to the heroic version of the Dunera narrative?
Yeah, it's certainly, because I had two people, and there was such a lot of material on Reinhold. I'd been urged for a long time to write a book about Reinhold, and the people encouraging me were Ken Inglis and Conrad Queet, two eminent professors.
And your siblings?
Oh no. That, I don't.
Busy doing other stuff.
Oh yeah.
But Dad also wanted something to be put together. He collected so much.
He had so
material
much
for a
stuff.
reason.
That's right. And then in his, we're lucky because he lived till nearly 96. So in the last sort of decade or more than a decade, a couple of decades, because he had all this material, he'd written it in German. So the great thing was that he could do his own translation, which means that the English translations of what he wrote in German are 100% because he's translated them. But we did it together because I had to type it into the computer, and sometimes it was kind of German syntax or whatever, so we discuss it or whatever.
It's quite a lovely thing for a father and daughter.
Yeah,
to
it
do
was
together.
also quite distressing, I can tell you. It was a lovely thing, but it was really, like writing the book was really quite hard. And also doing that translation work together was quite hard because it was sort of like, now we sort of know because we can just pick up the book and read it, we all know. But these were all things that hadn't come to light. So it was like, oh my God, oh, that's awful. And all the terrible things that happened. But anyway, we did that together. Now I've forgotten what the question was. But yes, no, that's right. I didn't get around to, we did the translation of those two exercise books from German into English. So that was really important. And but I never could kind of come to doing the book because it didn't seem quite right. There was something missing. And there were two stories, and I had one, but I didn't really have the other. And the hold-up was that I didn't think I could get the other one because Waldemar hadn't done all this writing, and there weren't the sort of long letters saved, a few postcards and short letters I found in archives. But yeah, it just took me a long time to really be a detective and go through every tiny little thing I had, that all these papers that have been left behind that are at my house, and then also trawl through archives to really make sense of his story. So the two stories are like two sides of the one coin. You can't separate them, just have one story or the other story. The two stories fit together and they give a complete picture.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great strengths of the book, the two remarkably different stories. Just before I move on, if I can, Stephen and Erica, when you read the book, or when Tonia was talking about writing the book, was there information that you discovered or that was new to you?
Probably the worst part was that it was stressful. You read it, and I felt really panic-stricken for Dad, because when he was translating from German his version of what he'd written in his diaries to English, he would, for instance, give a chapter to my husband, and my husband would correct things, being in the English area. And Dad would say, no, because this is written as a 17-year-old, and I want it to stay as what I was then. And then it sort of made sense that this is why certain words were chosen and a certain angle was approached. But yeah, I had to keep telling myself all the time, he made it, he had me, he had Tonia, he had Stephen, he's all right, he was married, he was happy, he loved his life. but it makes you feel sick when you're actually reading it. And Tonia said, well, it's all right for you. Imagine trying to write it. And it is exactly the same thing. You feel sick. And I've noticed that friends of mine who've read the book say it's an amazing book, it's wonderful. They've now passed it on to other people to read, but it makes them feel sick. They feel panic-stricken because he's explaining what he went through in Vienna, and it's a real person in real situations, and because of his brain, he records the environment, the wallpaper, the things that make you feel like you are really there.
Yeah, that's the first chapter. But I didn't actually share the book with them along the way. I think yes, because it's sort of a long, yeah. Yeah, it was like hard to write. Sometimes it was very upsetting, and it would invade my thoughts in the middle of the night and all of that kind of thing. But I didn't talk about it really with them.
No, I just say it made me feel sick reading that chapter, and she said, well, how do you think I felt I was writing?
Yeah,
Particularly for Waldemar as well. He was a lovely man, and we felt so sorry for what he went through.
I think we all learned a lot out of reading the book, a lot of the detail that as a child you're actually living, you have a different lived experience of your parents, of Waldemar and Dad. And, we remember them as people rather than, where they came from. And so it was really quite revelatory, I think, reading the book. But it was very, very humbling as well that, we are also part of that story. And I think that, what I take away from growing up in that family has taught me very valuable lessons in life as well. And it all translates into how I think about things and how I do things today. And but I still think there's that sort of underlying trauma within the family too, which perhaps none of us talk about, but it's simmering there. And I think that's one of the scars I guess we all have to bear. We've all got our own lived experiences, and we live them in different ways. But it's quite a story.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing, and that is that I think there are things I've discovered that Dad didn't know, and that he would be amazed and surprised and very interested, that would make sense. I don't know that he understood why Waldemar committed suicide, for example, and as I said sort of at the beginning, I don't think the family perhaps understood why Waldemar was a bit upset, or quite upset in his third year of medical studies. But I can see now he had very good and clear and justifiable reasons. Yeah. And Dad was quite younger, so. Do you have insight into your parents when you're just a kid or a teenager? Probably not. Do you have insight when you're a kid or a teenager into your older brother's deeper feelings? Not necessarily. So I think the book's brought more to light.
I have one last question, but before I proceed to that, thank you to the three of you for being so open there. My last question, I was thinking about this the other day. I've been to many people here have been to many Dunera functions over the years, and I think quite possibly the most regular attendees are members of the Eckfeld family. I've often seen Erica and Stephen and Tonia at different Dunera functions in different places. And I have inferred from that, and I may be wrong, that clearly there is something, attending those functions and reunions means something to you. Are you happy to tell us what those events mean to you? Like, what is the prompt for you to attend? And just, I add an asterisk there. I mean, there are members of the Dunera diaspora who have no interest in attending any of these functions. It's just not their thing. And so that's sort of what's prompted my question. What's your interest in going along?
Well, I think it's important to commemorate, and it's important to to remember, and it's important to celebrate what's good. And there are lots of good things about being brought up as part of the Dunera family, the Dunera community, and being part of that. As I said to Danny at the beginning, it's like having all these cousins and second cousins and in-laws as well. It's a sort of family. There's a sort of connection, even, people you haven't met before or, met a few times. It's, it's like having our auntie, here. So there's that nice warm feeling. And the events are a chance to learn new information. You, Elizabeth, right? You're sharing about, you're a Queen Mary person, you're sharing your story. So there's always something to learn. And also just to socialise. I think it's just as the Dunera and Queen Mary internees were they were really so many remarkable individuals. The Dunera descendants and in-laws are also, really, very, interesting and doing quite amazing things. And I think, the Dunera is sort of for the Dunera people, the kind of the umbrella term. And I remember my parents discussing the use of the term Dunera as the sort of identifier for the group. And it was like, well, why would we want to use the sort of the worst thing that ever happened? Because it was a long drawn-out experience of terribleness. Use that as the identifier for this group. But whether that's the best thing or not the best choice, probably because of the Dunera that we're all actually here anyway. Not just here in the room, I mean actually here. If that hadn't happened, well, maybe we descendants wouldn't have happened.
And we didn't realise it at the time, but all our friends, our dentist, our doctors, our photographer for our children's photos, everybody was a Dunera person.
The stonemason was Janet Arndt's father, for Waldemar's grave in 1959.
I'm drawn to those kinds of people, the European, Austrian, German people, because they were the only people that we really knew when we were growing up, apart from Mum's family. They were all European with this accent, which Dad, we would say, Dad has an accent, and he would say, no, I don't, and he would correct our English. We are attracted to the Dunera Association because Eva Duldig, is a classic person who, we were having our photos taken at the shrine, and she dragged me into the photo, and Tonia, and the photographer looked questioningly, and Eva said, no, they're family. And, we were sort of included, and that's how we feel about it. And the other thing, the two other things about Dad, he was always wanted to live as long as he possibly could to, I suppose...
Say it nicely.
Yes, so I'm trying to say it nicely, so that Hitler wouldn't get his way. So he was quite satisfied that he was in his 90s. That was a good thing. And Dad worked on, as an architect, some highly classified projects, airports, worked for the Commonwealth government on major things, and had a very high level security in the military area. And
which he thought was ironical, given his start in Australia as a prisoner.
That's right. And turning full circle is quite, satisfying, I think.
Yeah.
I once asked Ken Inglis if he had any. I knew Ken was an empirical historian, not a theoretical one, but I wanted to ask him if he believed in any particular history theories. He said, no, not for me. Oh, one. Everyone's connected to Dunera somehow, even if they don't know it yet.
That happened to me when I had eye surgery. I was in the waiting to go into the operating theatre, and the conversation came up because the anaesthetist was Jewish, and his father was a Dunera-boy, so it happens everywhere.
I might, can I come to you in 1 second? Yeah, I'll come to you first with questions. Just before I come to you, sir, 2 things. Please join me in thanking Tonia. And before we take that question, can you tell us, Tonia, how we can get your book, please?
Oh, well, if anyone's really interested, I've brought a few copies along. It's usually about $40, but if you've got $30 tonight, that'll be okay. I think I've got 5. So.
Can I put my hand up for one?
Sure. So it's the one taken here, the book, 2.
Father in Sydney was a Dunera boy.
Sure, totally.
I promised her I'd get her a book tonight.
Absolutely. So I can sign them. I've got the signing pen. So you want one?
If we run out, it is available through Monash University Publishing. Thank you for your patience, sir. We have please wait for the microphone to make its way to you. The man in the blue shirt there. Yeah, thank you.
Jack, I don't want to go through here, so if you could pass.
That better? So first of all, thank you so much for documenting what you have done. It's very important. To the rest of us here, many of whom are family of Dunera survivors, it's important that we all document what we know. That even if it's a paragraph put into a directory in a computer, that the unique histories are in some way kept, and that hopefully at some point in time it can be collated. But everybody has every Dunera survivor has a unique story parallel to this. So most of us here have that within us. And to me, I think it's important that that be documented.
Yeah, I think you're very right, and I think we're within a whisker of losing a lot of things. Our parents had this material, but maybe didn't want to deal with it too much. But we're the inheritors of it, and we also sort of know the story. We know the people, and we can put it together. It's harder than if it goes down, another generation will be lost. Or
everybody is different. Everybody's knowledge is different.
Yeah.
And it all warrants being collected.
More than 2,500 individual stories. Everyone is different.
Yeah.
This is just
and
2.
I have a question with regard to Ireland. Ireland was notoriously pro-Nazi. Did that have any influence on your family and more broadly on the way Jews were treated in Ireland?
Our family got to Northern Ireland with the help of a program instigated by the Quakers, and they were very well treated in Ireland and very happy. My aunt, who as there was a legal secretary, had to go and be a live-in domestic. And and I think the first placement that she had was with a woman, a German woman who was a Nazi married to a Brit. And that was a very, very unhappy and dreadful experience for her. But the other family members didn't have that experience and were very happy. And Reinhold must have talked a lot every day in driving the bread van with Mr. Harley, the bread man, because when he was 19, he gave a quite long lecture in the Hay camp, which is included in the book, and he talks in great detail about the situation of Ireland, Nazism, and the British and the war. So those issues were discussed and known, and Reinhold talks about it. It's sort of funny in the book. There are parts of it that I think are really boring, personally. And that lecture was one where I thought, oh, will I put that in or not? Another part that I thought was quite boring was he goes on and on about his taxation clearance, trying to get out of Vienna. And it's interesting that some of those parts are parts that other people think are the best part in the whole book. So there are people in Ireland who think that lecture that he gave as a 19-year-old in the Hay camp was incredible, which it is, but they love that. And someone in Vienna, just in the last couple of weeks, told me that the taxation part was her most favourite part of the book because it showed the Austrian mentality of using bureaucracy as a tool to inflict suffering on another person. So there's different things, but yeah. I think this gentleman was...
Your description of Waldemar and the medical side is particularly pertinent to something that happened in my life. I had an uncle, Ziggy Atlas, people here may have known him, they may not, but he was the ultimate sportsman. Now, he got here after the war, not on the Dunera, and he was acclaimed as being the best butterfly swimmer in Australia, and he had his medical degree. And they said, swim and you'll be in the Olympic team. He said, no. He said, medicine is my life. I'm going to help people. That happens for 1 week or 2 weeks of the year. I survived. I wanted to become a doctor. I became a doctor, and I'm not going to swim. And as a result, they gave me an Australian team ticket anyway. Then the Polish team turned up. Their doctor had died. So yours surely is an Australian team ticket. Amazing story, isn't it? He refused to swim. They give him a ticket in compensation because he wouldn't come. Then the Polish team turns up. Their doctors died, and I ended up at the Olympics as a 12-year-old. Going every day.
Wow.
Amazing. You've actually explained more than I've ever heard before.
Which
the
was?
impact of how Waldemar was affected by the fact he couldn't go on and do medicine, because I thought he was crazy when he wasn't going to go to the trials. But you're the first person who's really fully explained that, and I really appreciate it, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And I could see, because he had a notebook in Ireland, and he had the University of Belfast and a contact there, and I sort of then looked deeper at what was going on with that. And the University of Belfast was offering scholarships to refugees to resume their medical studies. So I could see he was trying there, but here there was no pathway. Once he'd had, he was stateless here, and to become naturalised, one of the questions was if you'd ever had any mental illness, and the Eckfeld family were tremendous rule followers, so he would have, written the true answer, and that was a disqualification for citizenship. And he couldn't get into the army, so there was no opportunity for the Commonwealth retraining scheme support. So there was no support. Reinhold always shared, in the family they always, whatever they had, they shared. So when Reinhold was in the army, half of his pay was deferred, and the half that he got, one half of that went to Waldemar and the other half he kept to live on. But it was enough to keep Waldemar just, both of them ticking along, but it wasn't enough to pay for a university degree.
Thanks for the great explanation.
Thanks, yeah.
I suspect Waldemar too is probably suffering chronic pain with his broken teeth and all that sort of stuff from his beating. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
terrible.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question.
Okay.
Question.
Oh, and also I know Simon has been saving some.
Yeah.
He told me already. He already told me before, 8 weeks ago.
First, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a very quick, just a statement. Firstly, thank you very much. This has been a wonderful evening, and my grandfather was on the Dunera and died in 1969. I was born in 1972, so I'm getting the information from my aunt who mentioned that he was on the Dunera, and it was just something interesting.
And he went back to the UK?
Went back to the UK.
Straight away?
Yeah, pretty much straight away, and I'm finding out more about that. And then I grew up in England, and long story short, became a rabbi, and at the end of 2024, got a phone call from a person in Melbourne saying, would you like to be the rabbi of our community?
Because you've got a Dunera grandfather.
Because I have a Dunera
You belong
grandfather.
here.
So as I said, apparently this was all part of the plan, and I just needed to come back and
Correct.
find out really about the community.
Yeah,
but
correct. You're in the right place.
A lot of it's finding out really, and how wonderful it is. But really the best part, I think, is just to be able to find a community of people who are like-minded in that way, and it explains a lot about parents and aunts and how they were seriously affected. And I think this is just an ongoing part of it. And the question really is how, as I think that what you said as well, every single detail, every single part is important. And I'm looking forward to putting any extra bits that I have. But rabbi in North London, a 95-year-old man passed away anonymously in a flat. The person in charge of, during COVID, the person in charge of burials for that council saw that there was a tiny little menorah in his room and said, I may be Greek, but that man must be Jewish. We can't cremate him. He has to be buried. Need to find a rabbi. Long story short, we find the man. We find out a little about him. We do more genealogy. Turns out he was also on the Dunera, knew more about my grandfather. And all of a sudden I get a call from one of the archivists of the Dunera who says, would you like to know a bit more about your grandfather? And all of a sudden, extraordinary amount. So as I say, literally from a man in a fridge in North London, I get connected to my grandfather in Australia. So I had to come. So
that's
thank you
great.
very
So
much.
welcome. Yeah, thank you for coming. Yeah. Simon's been waiting for weeks.
I don't want to jump the queue or anything.
No, I'm scared of Simon's questions because he said, I've got questions.
No.
Yeah.
Don't be scared.
That's all right. Oh,
Just
all
relax. So I've got questions about the Irish connections, but I might save that until we're one-on-one.
Okay,
Although,
sure.
just in response to the comment behind me, and I'm married to a proud Irish nationalist, I think she would say that they're more anti-English than pro-Nazi. But we can talk about that afterwards. Now, my question is, and it was something Seumas said, your dad comes across from the book as this gentle, intelligent, decent man. And I think for me, the story that really exemplified that was the relationship that he had with his school friend.
Yeah.
And that took a number of turns. Maybe you could just touch on that briefly.
Yeah, we saw Reinhold and Alfred at the beginning in the park playing marbles, and we saw them in their school photo before things went terrible. Because Alfred became enamoured with Hitler, and he in fact shook Hitler's hand and was very excited about that. And he wouldn't acknowledge Reinhold he joined the Nazis, and he wouldn't acknowledge Reinhold on the street anymore. They were still friends in private, and Reinhold was very close to Alfred's parents, who were socialists. But Reinhold always felt that Alfred was his best friend, regardless. He never wavered in that. As soon as the family got to London, the first thing that Reinhold did was to write a letter to Alfred. And the reason I know that is because we've still got the letter. Reinhold kept the letter because the letter didn't get finished because war broke out. Reinhold was writing the letter of the story of what happened, going to the West Railway Station and the train journey and on the ship and blah, blah, and how London was and so on and so forth. Yes, but the letter couldn't be sent because war broke out and there was letters couldn't be sent anymore. So we still have that letter. The next time Reinhold could try to reconnect with Alfred was after the war. So he wrote to Alfred and received a letter back from Alfred's father with a photo of Alfred in his Wehrmacht uniform. And Alfred had been killed on the first day of fighting on the Russian front, which was the 30th of September 1940? 41. And it was the letter from Alfred's father Reinhold kept, and it's in the book, and it's a very beautiful and heartfelt letter from the heartbroken parents to have lost their only son. Their son Alfred was a medical orderly. And after the war, when Eugenie went back to Vienna from the UK in preparation to subsequently migrate to Australia. She visited the Muller family, the parents, and they gave some gifts for Reinhold and for our mother, Beryl. And one was the ring that Alfred always wore on his hand that would have shaken Hitler's hand. And Reinhold always said, he shook the hand of the man who sent him to his death, and the ring that was on that hand has come to Australia and is safely kept here. It's in a safe place. It's in a safe place, well looked after. Yeah. So, yeah. So all along, so Reinhold never wavered till 95, nearly 96, that Alfred was his best friend. So he didn't sort of blame him. He just thought it was a bit foolish, but yeah.
I'm conscious it's 8 o'clock, so we could probably take one more question. And
I have a friend whose parents, the father particularly, surname Arnott, I can't remember his name offhand. He was very involved in the Moorabbin Synagogue, I think in the establishment of it. But my question is, the photographs and the papers that you had from the university and so forth, how did you get this? Because my family's from Poland and I don't have any photos or anything of their family, only through France, through relatives. But I'm wondering, Germany was a bit different, but did he take them with him or
So it's
what?
a bit of a how to discover this information and get these primary sources. So some things we had. So some they weren't able to take. They could only take very little, almost nothing.
Could you tell us what you had and what you?
So as I described at the beginning, that our family was a mixed family. So Wilhelm was Jewish, Eugenie was Roman Catholic, but she converted to marry because under Austrian law, you had to be the same religion because marriage was governed by the religious institutions, so you had to be the same. Later, after 20 years together, they divorced, Wilhelm and Eugenie, and she reverted to Roman Catholicism. Anyway, nevertheless, she had Jewish classified children, and she wanted to go with her children. So she was from a Roman Catholic family, and within that family, amongst her, she had 3 brothers, 5 sisters. Amongst the altogether 5 sisters, 3 of them married Jews, 2 of them converted to become Jewish, and in the other case, the man converted to Roman Catholicism to marry. So in other words, part of the family that was classified Jewish were lucky enough to leave, and the Roman Catholic part of the family stayed in Vienna, in Austria. So when the Eckfeld family left to go to the UK with virtually nothing, they were able to give the keys of their flat to the 2 sisters who were staying in Vienna, and so some possessions were retrieved and retained. So after the war, Eugenie went back and she was able to collect some of her possessions and also some of the children's possessions. And at that time, some interesting things were collected, like the children's drawings, their artworks were obviously very highly valued in the family, because amongst the things she brought to Australia were their folios of drawings, some of which I've only discovered last year, including the drawing of, that Reinhold did of the park. Some other things. So, for example, Waldemar's academic records. Those were thrown overboard. They could take documents, paper with them when they left, and all of his medical records, medical study records, were thrown overboard by the Pioneer Corps guards, with all of his possessions. And I got those records through someone who specialises in Holocaust studies at the University of Vienna, and has been doing a lot of academic work on this, and he kindly trawled the university archives, going back right into the 1930s to get Waldemar's entire enrolment record for me and to send that. So for each semester it had, the details of him and his religion, his age, various, his address, whatever. All the subjects that he took that semester, they all were ticked, as he passed them all, and who his professor was for each subject and how many hours per week. So it's only recently in going back over that material and with the help of someone in Vienna, actually at the Jewish Museum in Vienna, the team there they'd asked for, they're doing an exhibition, so I'd sent a lot of material over, including that they'd asked for Waldemar's academic records, and they noticed Pernkopf as his final anatomy professor. And then when I looked a bit more, I thought, well, who else? Then I found who Sauser was that he'd had in the previous semester for preparing a corpse. So anyway, that's how I found out, and with a bit of insight from someone else.
So the photos were...
The photos were from other family members. So there were family members still in Austria, and there were family members in the UK, and some went from Austria to Northern Ireland actually after the war. So photos came from different places, from now Dublin. Yeah, well now it's south, but they were living in Londonderry in the north. So various sources. There were letters I found in the State Library, Queensland archive, all sorts of places. A lot of things online.
Those letters were pre-1940 or?
Sorry, the letters. The letters were later, so I wanted a bit of insight into Waldemar's death, and
but there's nothing before 1940, say 1939, 33. That were there any letters?
Letters, no. The letters really. I think the first letter in the book is from 1939 when they arrive in the UK, and Reinhold writes to Alfred. That's the first letter, and then obviously correspondence is really important between Australia and the UK, and Eugenie kept the letters, postcards, and they're kind of rare and precious discoveries or remnants. Yeah.